Hello all, I'm Piotr. Today we'll talk about designing sound and music for VR games and some other things I'd like to give my insight on. And I'll start with something different. I think you all know one or two guys who are always inviting you to their place, and you are entering their houses. Everything is clinically clean. Everything is in perfect order, and then they tell you, sorry for the mess. So I've got this similar feeling when I'm reading YouTube videos comments written in perfect English, and it often ends with sorry for my English, I was in rush. So yeah, I really from the bottom of my heart, sorry for my English today. This is my first ever presentation in English. Okay. Who am I and how I get here in a few words? My game dev experience is around 6 years of composing music, writing scenarios, dialogues, and later also game mechanics. During these 6 years I went through very different projects, starting with Earthworms, which was spooky Twin Peaks-like eerie point and click. I've scored the game, I've written all the text in the game. Then one of the more interesting projects was Adventure. The project is ongoing. The demo is available on itch.io and on Gamejolt. This one is funny because it's a Polish JRPG in a classic style of games like Mother or Earthbound. Next game comes from the city we're in, from Poznań. It's Coffee Noir, kind of like you probably can see, business detective game. It's a coffee tycoon with criminal intrigue. I've written all the dialogues and all the psychological portraits within the game, since there are many interrogation scenes within this. This one's the closest to my heart. It's the mobile game PUBG, on which I've worked directly with PewDiePie. I don't know if you're familiar with the guy. He's one of the biggest YouTubers out there. I've scored his game. I've also made all sound design there. Then I scored The Tenants, which is a more recent topic, and the game is actually coming out of early access in like 10 days or something like that. And then I've stumbled upon Yupitergrad. Yupitergrad team asked me if I would be willing to help them scoring the game and also working on the narrative. And the project was super fresh to me back then. It is still super fresh, but back then it was something new for me, since it was the first VR game I've experienced. It was my first VR experience ever, and it was also the first VR experience I've worked on. Since then, Yupitergrad started my interest in VR and designing sound, designing narratives in VR. And here I am now. Today I'm talking to you on behalf of 3R Games, the company, the VR game dev company for which I am the CEO. And the first title we've debuted with 3 months ago is Thief Simulator Port. It's I think you know the game, but this is the Quest 2 port. The game was completely redesigned and rewritten from scratch to make it work on Quest 2, to make it fluid and to use to make use of my best audio knowledge and creative narrative knowledge to expand the experience of the game and make it for the simpler graphics we had to go with in order to make the game even run on Quest 2. So, when we are talking audio immersion, the first distinction we have to make is audio immersion in flat screen gaming and in VR experience. By flat screen gaming, I understand everything you are playing while looking at flat screen. So it can be a PC game, it can be a handheld, it can be any console you can think of. And flat screen gaming experience is a kind of, it's my opinion, indirect experience, since we are all experiencing the game as a media, or let's say it's the other way. We are separate from the media we're experiencing. The game is itself, and we are separate as a media consumer. And while obviously through our actions in game, we can alter the flow of the gameplay, the narrative, and so on. But there are some important things that stops us from really getting into the game on the level that, as we will see, is possible with VR games. So when we are playing the game flat screen, we're experiencing the game outside of it. Like we've said, the media and we as the game consumer are separated. There are also physiological barrier between us and the in-game environment which we are exploring, and it's obvious. It's the screen we are looking at, that's also the controllers by which we control the character in-game. This means even with first-person perspective games, we're experiencing the action not really as us, ourselves in-game, but via in-game character or persona. So psychologically speaking, we are the reason of movement on screen. We are controlling the character, we're controlling the vehicle or the spaceship, whatever, but we're not really directly experiencing the stimulus the object gets on screen. So we could say we are more, while flat screen gaming, we are more like an active spectator than an actual action participant. And since we are used to experience games like movies, we are okay with the feeling our experience of flat screen gaming can be shaped with all the artistic tools available for the creators, like us, like you. And it's a bit like in the movies, when you can highlight some action with proper lighting, proper SFX, proper musical score. There's no this awkward feeling of where is this coming from, because we know it's a game, it's there, it's not us. Hence the indirect character of the experience. Okay. Now, besides music, there's obviously the whole audio sphere or area of the game projects, and you could, you shouldn't, but you technically could go away with audio being good enough or just passable. Actually, in many games, the audio is the weakest layer of creation of the aspect of the product, and in flat screen gaming you could you can go away with it. In VR it's absolutely impossible, and we'll see why it is like that. Okay. Now, the game I've mentioned, Thief Simulator, as you probably can imagine, is a lot of sneaking around the houses, sneaking around trying to avoid police, tenants. While you are looting the houses, you're trying to avoid being caught. So the game falls into the stealth genre, and the PC flat screen version and PC VR, because the game is available for Steam VR, used the music, the specific kind of music, to boost the feeling of being endangered. This is the kind of music you can hear when you are entering the house in flat screen Thief Simulator and on PC VR Thief Simulator. Okay. I think you get the idea. It's screaming stealth game. It's screaming infiltration, sneaking. It sells the idea perfectly. It boosts the mood in a very good way on flat screen. Now with VR, the audio immersion and the whole gaming experience is much more direct than with flat screen gaming. And the reason behind it, the main reason behind it is we are experiencing the game from the inside. We as a player are a part of the game. So the physiological and psychological barriers are minimal comparing to a flat screen gaming, when we already know we are separated from the media, we're altering with our actions. Okay. Now when you first start your VR adventure, the tutorials may be very flashy. They tend to be very saturated with the visual effects, sound effects, things shaking, things turning around. And it's obviously done this way to blow your mind with the awesome piece of tech you've just put on your head, on your face. And I've played inter-device tutorials on a few VR headsets. They are similar. They are directed clearly to impress you as the first-time user. And these tutorials are directed in a way the movies are directed. So you are expected to do everything that was designed within the experience, and you got success jingles when you push the button, you got the objects you're reaching for highlighted, everything's so magic. It's a kind of yeah, well, it's a kind of magic touch you don't really experience when you are in the real world. Now I'm talking about it because it's all great on all the effects and all the boosting the experience of being in a virtual world. But while all these effects obviously scream virtual, they don't really build the reality part. And of course, it doesn't mean VR games should always mimic the real thing, because the real thing is the real thing. However, if any of you played Half-Life Alyx or games that are trying to mimic the reality, you know half of the fun is to check how far the devs went with recreating the real world before you start realizing it's a game. And that's because once you are in a game that gravitates toward realism, you want to be fooled. When you are playing a knight or a killer robot in a sci-fi horror, you don't really feel the need to inspect the environment carefully, because it's not the core of the experience you're getting. With the games focused more on copying or mimicking our real world, it's much different. Okay, now let's do a little experiment. Imagine that this class, this room we're in, is a level, virtual reality level from our game, Thief Simulator for Quest 2. And now some of you will try sneaking out to steal some snacks. Okay, thank you, Patricia. What I wanted to show you is when you are prepared for the media, like I'm standing here, you're prepared, my voice will be coming from the loudspeakers. It's a kind of like flat screen watching. We're here, but you know the sound will come from the speakers. But when you are in game and you are sneaking, you don't want to be you don't want anyone to notice you, and then out of nowhere such music starts playing. This music, I think you've realized, you've heard, is very percussive in its nature, very attention drawing. It's like, well, it sucks. In VR, it's like walking on a movie set when you are a thief and the music comes in and you are like, I'm stealing, look at me, ma. This is sneaking music. It's very unnatural, and I wonder why the PC VR creator versions decided to use it. Because when I was playing it, even before we started porting the game, it immediately destroyed my immersion and broke me out of the game flow. Okay. And why is that so? Why is that strong musical stimulus coming out of nowhere in VR breaks the immersion or makes me nervous? I mean, maybe your experience will be similar. When I was thinking about it, I came to the conclusion it takes us back like 60, probably 1,000 years ago, when the cavemen were scanning the areas they were entering. So when you were entering the cave or the field or the forest you've seen for the first time, everything could harm you, hurt you, or kill you. So before you got the feeling you've got your environment under control, you were super focused. And the thing is, 60,000 years passed, but our brains really hasn't changed that much. So even if we are in VR and we have no feeling of complete control over the environment, which is the sole purpose of the stealth genre games, we are super focused. And when we are super focused, we are very sensitive to even the slightest, smallest changes in our field of perception. That's why when I'm sneaking outside of the house with no music and I'm entering the house in VR and the music starts playing, the experience is, for me, it was game breaking in terms of mood. But then again, we want to keep our tools of shaping the user experience in a way we could alter his or her impressions with the game. And we can make it differently. And I'll start with what we've done in our version of the game, because we've kept the tension, but we've mixed it differently, and I've used completely different music. In order to build a feeling of tension, I've decided to go for a discrete kind of underscore, without the attention-drawing percussive elements, but just enough to give you creeps, and still keeping the music more in the background didn't break the experience while you were sneaking. Here's the sample that's actually present in our version of the game. Okay, it's super loud right now, but when you are playing, you can, within the game, you can hear also the night ambience, your steps, and this underscore comes in when you are endangered. Now let's compare it to the first version. Okay, I feel you all feel and acknowledge the difference. Now it's important to say the music in VR can get much busier without breaking the immersion. So I'd like now to proceed to the second part. That would be building musical intensity with layers. And the game we'll be talking about right now is Yupitergrad, the first VR game I was working on. And the game has a very distinct visual style. It comes from the USSR era of space race with United States. So it consists lots of Slavic or pan-Slavic elements. We'd also like to and wanted to show with the music. Now the sound palette of Slavic instruments is very attention-drawing, with things like accordions, choirs, flutes, things like that. So we knew we wanted this music to be highly melodic and keep the Slavic vibe, but we had to do it carefully because we didn't want to force it on the player the same way I showed you. The stealth music was forced upon the player in a TIFF in PC VR version. Now, the music we've designed for Yupitergrad was implemented through systems of loops and layers, and the music develops with the progress the player makes. So it works like that. You are entering the set of chambers and corridors, and every few corridors and chambers there's another, you are actually unlocking, with being there, with entering the new chamber, you're unlocking the next musical layer. And this allowed us to create the musical impression that really highlighted the game's specific atmosphere without breaking the immersion in a way it would do if we presented the whole full-fledged track right away. Okay, I'll just show it to you with a little commentary. Okay, so what you can see here are the blocks of music, and again, I've started building the atmosphere with just the ambient sound we could identify as being the sound of space station. We won't listen to the whole thing, but I'll show you the pieces. So when you were starting in a space station, the music began really silent. Then since you are on a space station far from Earth, you're there looking for a signal from Earth. I implemented lots of radio-like signals within the soundtrack to make the audience feel like there were some signals approaching the station, maybe some kind of lost communication. Then we added air two kinds of air. The first one was derived from the Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick, and it was a kind of intimate breathing in and breathing out. It really boosted the atmosphere of being there alone, and also some hydraulic sounds of the retro station, hence the hisses you are hearing right now. I'll just jump forward past the bass part, because when you want to build tension, it's always good to go for pulse. So the bass does its job very well, and we'll jump somewhere here. Bless you. Now, we've already introduced the beat, because after a few chambers and corridors, you already catch the flow of moving in Yupitergrad, which is very similar to Spider-Man swinging with sticks. So the beat is there, you are already swinging and exploring open new chambers, and when we started upping the intensity. So first there are arpeggiators, then I added kind of like robo choirs and accordions. Then we kept adding more like melodic Slavic elements. And finally we got something like this. So you get the idea. We can make busy music in VR, but we have to introduce it gradually and not force upon the player. Okay, music with and without visible sound source. That's what we've talked about. I'd also like to talk about music with sound source. And the good thing you can do in VR is use your points of interest, since they naturally draw interest of the player. If your game has some kind of magic flower or a loudspeaker in a factory, these are all good objects to be designed as the sources of music. Elevator story. In Yupitergrad, we've got this funny part when you are entering the elevator, and the elevator takes you up. It takes some time to get you to the top, and one of the elevator walls is just a big window. So you're going up, and you're looking through the window to the giant space shuttle you'll be operating in a few minutes. So we've decided to use the loudspeakers within the elevator and place the music lifting you up in the same way the elevator was doing it physically. So since the game was, like I've mentioned, deeply grounded in the space race era, we've made it in a way I'll show you right now. Highly melodic, very strong, because it wasn't immersion breaking, since it was glued to the sound source, and when you're doing it and it hits, it can really hit hard. These are the biggest VR YouTubers in the world, some of them dancing to the track. Most of them are on the elevator level. Okay, I think you get the idea. Yupitergrad was also a chance to really pushed the soundtrack in a way unusual, I think, for many modern soundtracks, which are focused more on the production values, less on melody. We really went for a strong melody there, and I think the game benefited from it, since it spawned a set of really nice tracks. There are also time attack tracks, which are very different melodically. I'll just show you some hint. Okay, things like this, which also added a lot of character to the game. Now we're at the time. Can I have another 5 minutes, or should we finish? Okay. I'll just show you one last thing, guys. Shortcuts to grounding the player. When you are playing the game without the sound effects, not without music, but without sound effects, the game may feel like it's lightweight. Everything's like just paperweight. You're not really there, and the things are super light, because you can't feel the impression they are making on the game environment. And the main reason behind it is very often the lack of proper low frequencies in sound effects for the things you are manipulating with or operating with. So the shortcut to ground the player better in your VR, in the VR experience you are designing, is to boost the low frequencies. And how can you do it very fast on two ways? So here's the video of me testing the mob throwing sound with the basic samples and the samples with added bass. I hope it will be audible. Okay, I think the difference doesn't even need commenting. And how we're doing it. The first thing is, you can take your EQ with your samples and you can artificially boost the bass frequencies here. However, it won't work if the basic sample you're starting with has no bass at all, because you can't boost something that's not existent. And then you can go for more specific tools. Our bass stereo waves is awesome plugin for such things. It adds a lot of bass with just upping the intensity button. And of course, the best thing to do without working on bass, because you may have no skill or you may decide you have no time to do it, you may ground the player better in your game by changing only the samples for crucial actions. And the crucial actions are the actions that are most frequent within the game. For our game, let's say it's walking, and I'll show you the last video and when we can start walking. So the first set of samples are the samples from PC VR version. These are the samples we received with the source code when we decided to port the game to Oculus Quest. Now the second set of samples are my alternative we're testing right now. And this is the another alternative. Again, the first one. It's really harsh, it's really loud, it's more like walking on an old leaves in autumn, and when you are in game and you are sneaking many hours in game, there's a lot of grass in the game and you are constantly hearing this, it quickly becomes tiring. We kept it since we were kind of rushed with the release and the terms the meta gave us for the release. But we're upgrading it right now, so once you try the game, I think in a few weeks with the big update we're planning, all the new sounds will find their place in the game. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.